I'm hijacking your Subaru segment to talk about
It's okay.
Toyota, but it's
All
because
right.
they're the same cars.
Yes, exactly.
Uh, Hello and welcome back to the Plugged In Podcast, a weekly news show from InsideEVs all about the future of transportation. I'm Tim Levin.
And I'm Mac Hogan.
On this week's show, Mac drove the electric Subaru Outback, and he's here to tell us all about it. Plus, we have some updates from Donut Lab about its solid-state battery. And later in the show, we chat with Jiten Behl, former chief growth officer at Rivian and a partner at the VC firm Eclipse, all about what he's got his eye on in the mobility space.
That's a lot to get to, so let's jump right into it.
Let's do it. You drove the Subaru Trailseeker. It's not actually like the electric Outback. It is essentially an electric Outback. You drove the Trailseeker last week. You reviewed it for the site. And you came away pretty impressed. This was a surprise to me since you've been a big critic of Toyota and Subaru EVs generally. Tell us about the Trailseeker and why this one won you over more than some of those other EVs.
Yeah, so I mean, correction. I'm still a critic of Subaru and Toyota EVs, as I'll get to, but a lot of that comes down to in the segment where up until this year it was only the BZ4X, now the BZ, and then the Subaru Solterra. There's been better options with better software stuff and better technology and just things that I would totally pick in that segment. That's not really true with the Trailseeker. I think it's valuable to think of it as the electric Outback just because size-wise, an Outback is bigger than a Forester. You have more space than a compact SUV. And that is a place where there hasn't been a lot of options. I've been someone who is pretty skeptical of when automakers say that they're retreating from EVs for consumer choice, because it's really EV customers that don't have many options. And the perfect example of that is okay, I'm a random person that wants an electric SUV, but I have more stuff, or I like to go camping, or a big dog, and I can't fit it in a Model Y or an Ioniq 5. But I also don't want some $65,000, EV9, for the one that has the range that you actually expect. And, in that space, there just hasn't been that many good options. In the gas world, you can get a cheap Grand Cherokee or an Outback or a Blazer or whatever. And here
That's kind of like the heart of the gas car market is
right.
Mid-size crossovers around that size, pretty capable, pretty good amount of space. You can find 100 of them.
Right.
And that's
just
not been the case
Honda
for
Passport, all these things, right? So in the EV world, you've had to choose between the Jeep Wagoneer S, which it's a mess and it costs $65,000 anyway, so you might as well get a 3-row or just not get it, or the Chevy Blazer EV. And I was in a similar situation. I needed something with more clearance than an Ioniq 5. I also sleep in the back of my car when I camp. So I ended up with a Blazer EV, which I really like. But despite it being larger, very considerably larger than an Ioniq 5 or a Model Y, and being a much larger and heavier car, it doesn't actually have more cargo space because of that pinched back. So the Trailseeker shows up, and it's really it's a electric Subaru Outback with way more space than the Blazer. Subaru, being Subaru, says you can fit a full-size dog crate in the back. But I'll tell you one thing, I when I'm transporting Kickflip around, I cannot put his big crate in the back of my Blazer because the roofline is so jagged. So, and it all starts at $40,000 with 281 miles of range and 388 horsepower. So really good specs for a car that's $10,000 cheaper than the average, SUV or average vehicle in America right now, I should say.
Yeah, and it's more Subaru Outback than the actual Subaru Outback, which I think is also nice. The Outback has become this big upright sort of SUV type thing, and the Trailseeker is actually more of a wagon. The only thing really comparable to it is the BZ Woodland by Toyota, which I drove a couple weeks ago in California. Also, it is essentially the exact same car.
Yeah.
The only difference is that the Toyota only comes in a higher trim, so it's actually more expensive. It's $45,000. When you look at them compared, I mean, it depends on what you want in your car, but to me, the idea that you could get the Subaru for around 40 is a very good price.
Yeah,
across
definitely.
the board for EVs.
Yeah,
and especially for something of this size with this amount of ground clearance, all the stuff you're talking about.
For sure. And this is also one of the weird places where, like, the RAV4 massively outsells the Forester, but the Outback way outsells the Toyota Venza. Like, I mean, most people don't even know about that, in part because, like, if you're a Toyota guy and want the off-roading thing, you're going to go towards the, 4Runner or whatever. But one thing that's really clear with these cars, right? You drove the Toyota CHR and the BZ Woodland. I drove the Subaru Uncharted and the Trailseeker. And what I learned during that process, and what is kind of clear from the driver's seat, right, is like Subaru built the Trailseeker and the BZ Woodland, and Toyota builds the CHR and the Uncharted. And like, you can tell because this feels like a Subaru in a good way for this segment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I mean, what did you think about the off-road? Like, you're much more of a off-road guy than I am. Whenever we're on these events and we do some stuff like that, I'm pretty much just like flying blind.
Yeah.
What did you think about the way that this Trailseeker went on their little off-road course? Do you think that's like what you think is like comparable to what people would get in an Outback or something like that?
Yeah. So yeah, not to belabor the Outback comparison, but I do think like I've always said, like, I like to spend a lot of time on dirt, but I'm not like, unless you're going to have a winch or you're going with a group and can self-recover, like, solo rock crawling is not something that a lot of people are doing in this country. But what you often need if you're just like outdoorsy is like the ability to go down like a rutted fire road or a dirt road in a park. And I think, that's where Subaru has always crushed it. And I think this is a really, really good at that. 8.5 inches of ground clearance is more than you get in a base F-150. Like, it's not nothing. And then you have the X mode in the all-wheel drive, the grip control that's just basically can try to simulate locking diffs by grabbing at brakes here and there. Yeah, and I think it works pretty well. It's always hard when like a car company sets up a course where they have determined that the car can do it, and it's like, okay, well then you go around it, and obviously the car can do it.
Yeah.
But like in the CHR, if I hit stuff with a little bit more speed than they would like, I started to hear it bottoming out. Whereas in the Trailseeker, I didn't feel that. So I think it's really good at that. The limitation, like in most electric SUVs, is there's no spare tire. So that, Subaru is one of the few companies that usually does include one. So was a little bummed for that. But the biggest limitation on gas Subarus is usually actually the transmission, because like real off-roaders with four-wheel drive are usually going to have a low-range gearbox, because when you're crawling up something, it puts a lot of strain and heat into that transmission to crawl at low speeds. That's just not something that like a normal transmission is built for. And that's usually the limiting factor with a Subaru or a RAV4 or any all-wheel drive versus a four-wheel drive vehicle. But when you have 388 horsepower, and weirdly enough, they don't claim torque, which is the more important figure for this, but if you have 388 horsepower in an EV, you probably have 350 foot-pounds of torque. So I don't, it felt like a lot. So yeah, this thing has a lot more ability to climb, I would say, than an Outback does. And, has just as much clearance. So I don't really see why it would be worse in any way, but we have to sort of test that on our own trails before I'm comfortable, saying definitely great at that.
Yeah, on the InsideEVs in-house trails.
Yes, exactly. Outside EVs.
Yeah, no, I read your review. I edited your review. I largely agreed based on what I found in the BZ Woodland, which is like, I thought it was super comfortable just in general on the road and on these fire trails. I thought it was ridiculously quick. Like, it has almost 400 horsepower, and you really feel it. They build the Uncharted as like the sporty, they're like sporty offering. This like kicks that car's little ass. So I mean, our readers will know that Toyota's been criticized for the way it's been doing EVs for a long time, just for kind of dragging its heels. Toyota and Subaru by extension, because they are big partners in this, dragging their heels. And also, like, there have been things that are wrong with the cars. Like, the range was originally in the Solterra and the BZ4X, range was not that good. Charging was not that good. So like, based on your time with the Subarus, is that still the case? Like, what have they fixed here?
Yeah, yes and no. There's a lot of stuff they've fixed, right? Like, I think people don't remember this, but like when the BZ and the BZ4X and the Solterra came out, you could not fast charge those cars more than once in a day sometimes. Like, the car would limit itself on that, which was just wild. Like, I was like, all right, and and then you would probably only find that out in a really bad situation. So
I remember I took the BZ4X, small tangent. I took the BZ4X on a little trip in the winter a few years ago when it first came out. And I was limited to like 50 kilowatt charging or something, or like 37 kilowatt charging. It was like unbelievable. And I
Yeah.
suspect that it was that
Yeah.
exact issue. Like somebody the day before I had it, fast charged it, and then it's like, oh well, sorry,
Yeah.
you're on a road trip, like too bad.
Or they just delimited it when it was cold, which I think was a whole separate issue.
Yeah.
But yeah, so they've come a long way. But I think this, like, I wrote about the Lexus RZ like a year and a half, 2 years ago, about it being kind of half-assed and class leading at the same time. Because at the time, I have to double check. I bet the Lucid Gravity has usurped it. But at the time, actually, the most efficient electric SUV, as measured by the EPA standard, was the Lexus RZ, which no one would predict because they're perceived as behind this. But I think that factors in here, where, like, in a lot of ways, this is a more sophisticated and better EV than, my Blazer EV, right? It offers 90 more horsepower, more clearance, more cargo space, better ride quality, better steering, and a big efficiency advantage. It gets basically the same range as an all-wheel drive Blazer with a 74 kilowatt hour battery compared to an 85 kilowatt hour battery in the Blazer, which lower battery means you can offer a more competitive price. So in a lot of ways, it's just like clearly better. But would I take a Trailseeker over my car? And that's where I'm like, I don't know, because the thing I love about what GM has done with the EVs in the Ultium cars, that they don't use that name anymore, but you get a lot of little features that make like EV life better. Like I like that my car is just on when I get in it and it turns off when I leave it and I never think about it. But also it's got smart little features that like Teslas and other things don't have, where you just like, all right, there's always a button that you tap it once and it'll leave the car on for 60 minutes, or you can force it off. There's one pedal driving with a variety of different, level or two different levels of higher standard regen. And unlike the Hyundai stuff, when you get out of the car and get back in it, it doesn't reset to the middle level, right? Like it's got real one pedal driving. It's got route planning. So when I put a destination 800 miles away, it tells me where to stop. But even if I don't have to stop, if I say, hey, I'm driving here and it's 50 miles away, but it's in the mountains, so I don't really know what it's going to do, the car will say not only, oh, you'll be at 38% when you get there, but also you'll be at 17% when you get back. And I've had the car long enough that I trust those things. And like all of these little things that make it easier to own an EV, like video streaming at charge stops, which I thought was silly until you got to kill 30 minutes. And it's like,
Do you use that?
My car needs to go to the dealer to get a firmware update so it can get an over-the-air update so it can get that capability. 25s
Okay, so you would use it if
I
you
definitely
could.
would. I'm the guy who would use it. I use public charging a lot. But there's just like a lot of things like that make it clear to me that they consider this as a separate experience than a gas car. And like the Subaru just doesn't have any of it. Like it has no one pedal driving. In every mode it creeps, which, as I've written about, drives me nuts. Like why is a car rolled away when it doesn't have to? And of course you can do auto hold, but then you got to do that every time you get in. It has like a high regen setting that's kind of like one pedal, except even jerkier. And then you get down to like 7 or 8 miles an hour and just all the brakes release and you have to hit the brakes at the end, which like, what's the point? And in the year of our Lord 2026, it still can't plan a route for you. So if you say, I want to drive from here to Seattle, it's like, cool, you'll have to stop along the way. I won't tell you where. And it knows where the charging stations are. It knows what its range is. And like, that is where I get so frustrated, because it's just like, did the people who designed this, have they lived with an EV? Do they know that that's not like a convenience? Like that's a necessary thing. And so it's like, it's a really good Subaru, and it is perfect if you want an Outback but electric. But if you're coming from a different EV, it's a tough transition because there's just a lot of stuff that isn't there.
Yeah, it's so weird because they did fix certain things, right? Like this new generation of Toyota Subaru cars, like they have NAC ports, they have manual and automatic battery preconditioning. The charging is faster. Like they don't have that weird limitation that you talked about. But then there's these absolute basic, like it makes me crazy to think they're like, oh yeah, we solved everything. But if you want to go somewhere that's outside the range of the car, it won't help at all. You have to go to a third party app, which like maybe a lot of people do anyway. But if you want to make EVs easy for people, exactly. Like the car, exactly like you say, the car knows how much battery it has. It has a map. Like it shouldn't take that much to put all that together. And it's kind of baffling that they don't have that in the car. Like they let you do it through Apple Maps, I will say. The Toyotas, at least. I
Yeah,
don't know
the
about the
Toyotas
Subarus.
do. The Subarus didn't mention that, and it didn't. The guy I talked to didn't seem to know. I need to follow up with them, but like
Yeah.
Subaru PR said that there's no route planning. But I also would not be surprised if they just didn't realize that they have that same capability. Because yeah, if it's through Apple Maps, that's fine. I don't know, but
No, but it's through Apple Maps, but with other limitations. Like Apple Maps will plot stops for you, but it won't automatically precondition the battery when you're about to get there, because like for whatever reason, Apple CarPlay can know what the state of charge is of the car, but it can't like go in there and turn on battery preconditioning. So like this is the kind of thing that Tesla and Hyundai and GM and all of them have solved like a long time ago. It's just like, I mean, Tesla more so than any of the others. Like it's just seamless. You're just going somewhere. Everything just happens in the car for you. And that's why people love those cars. That's why it's easy to switch to them. The only other thing I'll mention is like just in general, I'm hijacking your Subaru segment to talk about Toyota, but it's because they're the same cars.
Yes, exactly.
Just the infotainment was just like really lackluster to me. Like I can't remember the last time I gotten a new EV that didn't have a home screen. You know, like you get in there and it's not like there's this home screen with little tiles that show you like, you know, your music player and your navigation and your whatever notifications, stuff like that.
Yeah.
It's just very basic. It's like from 5 or 10 years ago. You got navigation that, as we discussed, like doesn't really do all the EV stuff you want it to do. It doesn't have a button, like a quick one tap for charging stations at all. And then you have like other things, but it's not this like cohesive, it's not like a real user interface. It's just kind of a bunch of stuff thrown in there.
Yeah, and I'm like, I understand that. I think especially Subaru customers maybe are not shopping based on infotainment. And this is a challenge we have just of like, a lot of consumers will tell you, like, I don't really care about in-car software. I'm just going to plug in and use CarPlay. But I think that is a knock-on effect of car software being bad. It's not a justification to keep making bad software. And like, like why would I use the built-in Subaru system if it doesn't do anything? Like it doesn't, there's no capability. It doesn't, give you much useful information about charging, about, stops, anything like that. And yeah, I mean, I think fundamentally, like it's fine to not have this. Like you can use a third-party app, although I do think people who hand wave this away entirely don't really recognize that, well, if the third-party app isn't live updating, then like, yeah, if it's hotter than expected, or if you have more cargo than expected, or whatever, there's a million reasons.
Or if you're dragging a giant parachute behind you, that's like
that happens
your range,
dude. Every time I am driving down the highway, there's a guy paragliding off the back of the car, and I'm like, thank God my car has automatic route planning because it's fine. No, but you can get by without it, and that's why I would still recommend this car. It's more just like, what does this say about? Like we were having this conversation in 2021 about them not including all of these things. And, if the world's largest automaker cannot build an established software tool like route planning in 5 full years of development time, where there's been a mid-cycle for the BZ, 2 new products have come out. Now the Highlander EV is going to come out and presumably a Subaru version. Like, are they really moving fast enough? Is this whole, Toyota woven thing, this whole thing about we care about software-defined vehicles, like, there's definitely a risk of people moving too fast, and there's been plenty of software bugs and, other car systems. But like, I think there's this desire I think they have a problem of letting perfect be the enemy of good here, where maybe they don't want to, steer you towards an unreliable charging station or whatever. But the result can't just be throwing your customers to the wolves and being like, well, you figure out where to stop. And I think they might be underestimating the risk of moving too slow, because like, yes, you can win over your current Subaru buyers and your current Toyota buyers. But if somebody gets in a car that has all this stuff and is like, wait, why doesn't my car do any of this? Like, you can kind of sleepwalk your way into being a Kodak situation where you're so focused on like making it drive exactly like a gas car and making it feel like a gas car and using a common software platform for everything. And it's like, well, how are you going to get people excited about going electric? How are you going to get them to pay the cost premium? And at the end of the day, like I think that's why I came down a little harsher on like the Uncharted, and I think you were a little bit less convinced by the CHR, because the cost premium on the Trailseeker isn't very much. It's like $4,000 to $5,000, and you get all this awesome stuff of more torque and more power, and really just I think a better design, equally
you
as
mean
much space.
over the Outback?
Outback, yeah.
Yeah.
It helps that they made the Outback really ugly. I don't know if that was part of the marketing program for the Trailseeker, but yeah, it's just like you need to help push people over the hump, and companies like Tesla have like done a good job of being like, all right, you're not getting the exact same thing as a gas experience. You're getting all of this new stuff. You're getting dog mode, camp mode, and route planning, and all this stuff that just makes it thoughtless to own it. And yeah, I think I want to see them come a lot further with that, and I hope. I did ask if that could come via over-the-air update and like route planning, and they were like, we don't even know if we could do that over the air. Unsure, but we don't have a timeline. I mean, either way, I'm like, all right, well, it is what it is.
There's your answer.
Yeah. So anyway, with Subaru sort of locked down, let's shift gears and talk about the other big news this week, which is Donut Labs. Now, this is the Finnish startup that like shocked the world by saying we are going to have the first production solid state battery in an EV. And, that had a lot of skepticism, right? Like people understandably were like, who is this company that just came out of nowhere and is like, oh, we're going to beat everyone to the punch like Factorial and BYD or Toyota or whatever. But now they're really trying to prove it's legit, right? So what's the latest? How's that going?
Yeah, so Donut came out of the gate with some very big claims. 400 watt hours per kilogram of energy density, lifetime of 100,000 charge discharge cycles, 5-minute recharge time. They're basically like, we've solved everything that's wrong with batteries. And it's coming like right now, and you've never heard of us before. All that raised a lot of eyebrows because, like you say, there are a lot of big, well-funded companies like Toyota, for example, that are working really hard, have been for years on solid state. They kind of have leaned into the skepticism here, and they are using that to their advantage in this kind of like little PR campaign. They launched this thing called I Donut Believe. They are releasing these third-party tests every week to try to prove that they are doing what they say they're doing, that their battery is legit. Last week, so far we've gotten 2 of those. Okay. Last week it focused on charging. There were a few tests done by this independent research organization. The big test that I want to focus on is they pumped 11C worth of charging power into a cell, managing to charge it to 80% in under 5 minutes and to 100% in around 8. And I'll just briefly explain 11C. So like C rates for batteries basically means it's the amount of power that would be able to charge it 11 times in an hour. So like 6C would be 6 times an hour, 2C is 2 times an hour. 11C is a lot of power to put into a cell.
Yeah. Wait, to be more specific on that, to make sure everyone's with us, right? So 2C means that it takes 30 minutes to charge. So yeah, and then 3C is 60 divided by 20 minutes, all that. So this 11C is unbelievably fast. I mean, that you can do that with any battery without it becoming an explosive is super cool. I mean, also just imagine if you had a car that could charge from, to 80% in under 5 minutes. That'd be a pretty big deal, right?
Yeah, and we're not talking about, this isn't 10 to 80%. This was like from flat to 80.
Oh, sorry.
They did it in under 5 minutes. So yeah, no, it's amazing. It would be incredible if a car could do that. That would basically like solve, so many people's hangups with going to EV. I think the big question, and our colleague Sufroth has been doing a lot of reporting on this. He's been talking to battery experts. And like the question with this test specifically is, can that actually happen at the car level, at the pack level, right? Like just testing a couple of individual cells in a lab environment and charging them super fast with like minimal to no degradation. That doesn't say a lot about can you actually put these in a car and do the same thing over and over and over and over again 1,000 times over the lifetime of a vehicle. So like there's all these questions that, okay, great. Your cells can charge very quickly. Other people have demonstrated similar sort of charging, maybe even faster in lab settings. The question is like, can you do that over time? How does it degrade? What does the charging actually look like if you put these in a vehicle?
How much does it cost? Yeah, I think that's why I really try to emphasize, when we talk about this, and I think a lot of outlets maybe drop certain parts of this of like, it is the first production solid state battery in an electric vehicle, because all of those qualifiers are important, right? We have production solid state batteries, but they're tiny and very limited in scope. I think, you can use them in what to say, watches and little things like tiny batteries are using. There's some solid states out there. And then, yeah, production is the big question, right? We've had lab solid state batteries for quite a long time, but making something that is mass producible and all that is all its own challenge. Now, they say this is mass producible, this is coming. But, you know, it's still a big question of how that all works. But the charging claims are impressive. Now, they also have tried to introduce evidence on some other claims with similarly impressive, but also limited results of like, you know, how much we can run with this. So what else happened?
Everything still has the sort of same qualifiers, right? So this week, the latest release showed how this battery performs at very high temperatures. They tested it at 80 degrees Celsius and then at 100 degrees Celsius, which is boiling point of water. Like that is very, very hot for a battery. At 100 degrees Celsius, the cell performed better than it did at room temperature, delivering 107% of its normal capacity. And then it was able to recharge again after that. So this is super impressive because, I mean, if you know anything about lithium-ion batteries, like they do not like heat. They do not like being at the boiling point of water. If you push them too hard, they will lose efficiency. There will be thermal runaway. They can explode at these really high temperatures. Most batteries are really happiest at like roughly like ambient, you know, room temperature, like 70, 80 degrees Fahrenheit. The fact that this thing was able to survive in temperatures that are much, much higher than that, like 2 to 3 times that, is pretty impressive on a small scale. But again, it's like, what does that mean for a vehicle? Can it do that many, many times? And like, despite both of these tests, we still don't know the very basics, which is like, what is the chemistry of this battery? Is it actually a solid state battery? There's still a lot of questions. You know, I guess I have to give a little bit of credence, a little bit of props to Donut for like, they are putting out these independent third-party results. Yeah. They haven't answered all the questions that we have yet, and they haven't proven that, like, yeah, you're going to be able to get this in a car soon.
Yeah. I don't super love the whole strategy of, like, we're making a big show of, we're going to prove everything in one test increment spread over several weeks. Whatever number of weeks, we don't know. You know, it's hard to calibrate how seriously take it, because, again, these tests are really impressive. But a lot of the question is, that stuff of commercialization, scale, all of that stuff. But what's next for Donut? When will we hear more? And also, like, you know, just on your take, like, what do you think? What do you think of this company? How are you feeling about the current state of the evidence? You know, where are we?
It's like, I mean, I'll take the last one first. Like, it is hard to imagine. Both scenarios are hard to imagine. It's hard to imagine that Donut came out here and said, we have a solid state battery, right? And they're like absolutely full of shit, and they're releasing all of these test results, and eventually it's going to lead to nothing, or it's all going to come crumbling down. Like that's like a crazy scenario. It's also a crazy and unlikely scenario, I think, that they have done it, just because solid state batteries are really, really hard. There's enormous competition for this technology, and the idea that this totally unknown company is putting them into vehicles this year, which they say they're doing. They're going to put it into a motorcycle by this company called Verge. Like, that's also seems really unlikely. So I think whatever the outcome is, it'll be super interesting. I think for the industry, it would be amazing if this company was real, and if its batteries were legit. I think, honestly, like, I don't think we know enough yet. Like, I think that the healthy amount of skepticism that that the researchers and the media is putting on this, I think that's warranted. Like, you can't just come out and say we have discovered the Holy Grail without any real evidence.
But it's illegal to lie on the internet, so we should be fine. It's illegal to lie on the internet, so we'll all be good. I agree with what you're saying, though, of like it can't be nothing, right? Is what would the value be in that? It is weird of just like, not only that it's this random startup, but also that it's the launch customer is Verge Motorcycles, which wasn't super. I don't follow that industry very closely, but wasn't on everyone's radar. It's also like
a Finnish company. That's kind of the connection. I think there's connections between these two companies. But yeah, I think bottom
Yeah.
line is like there's just like still we can't really say
Yeah.
either way yet. Big
Well, and
questions.
also there's a lot of, everything is very flexible in terms of like, what does production mean, right? If we get it into 15 motorcycles next year, like that's production in theory. So could be that. But yeah, I'm with you of just like, I hope that this is just fully real and everything goes great. And there's a bajillion of these next year and we're ready to launch. But I definitely want to keep seeing more evidence about what's happening. And, as we've all learned in the EV industry a million times over, until the product is available to be purchased by a consumer, the numbers that are claimed, like don't put too much stock in them, right? Like how many times from huge companies we know well have they announced a big number that blows your mind of, oh my God, it's going to be that cheap or have that much range. And then 3 years later, the product hits the market and it doesn't do it, right? So healthy skepticism is good, but yeah, don't want to lose our hope. Like awesome breakthroughs can still happen. David versus Goliath moments still do happen. And like, if it's this company that came out of nowhere and did it, all the more power to them. And I'm excited to see what happens.
Yeah, we'll definitely be following this, and we will keep you guys updated.
All right, so that's the latest on Donut, but we're going to move into our third segment, and for that, we're going to welcome Jiten Behl. He is a VC, a former chief growth officer at Rivian, investor in Also, Ever, an EV startup. So he's got fingers all over the EV and mobility space, and we are super excited to have him here. So thanks for joining.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to start out with something that's fascinating to me of just, we see so many electric vehicle startups in China and, there's hundreds of them duking it out. And in the US, we have like Tesla and then Rivian. And then after that point, there's sort of a steep cliff of like other things that it's not proven, how far they'll go. And so I want to ask, like, what was your experience like as chief growth officer trying to get a startup built in this climate? And how has that changed, in the 2020s versus like the 2010s when Tesla had access to, I think, interest rates were a lot lower. VC appetite for risk and tech stocks or tech companies was a lot higher. So how has that changed, as the industry has progressed?
Yeah, I think you're reopening a few old scars over here, but I'm happy to get into it. I mean, I think, the environment when we were beginning to think about building Rivian and had this idea that the world needs another car company, it was very different than honestly where we are today. In that environment, there was a large portion of the capital stack, call it the VCs, that weren't very, I would say, supportive of ventures like building a car company, which had the archetype of, hey, you're going to spend, $1 billion to develop your first vehicle. Then you'll spend another hundreds of millions of dollars to generate, your first dollars of profit. And it's going to take, 7, 8, 10 years to get there. And, the risk reward profile was not in the zone, understandably. But around the same time, there was another big, I would say, tectonic shift that was happening, which was how technology was accelerating some of the development that goes into developing a new technology, a new system, a new component. And if you the best case in point, now that we have the benefit of hindsight, in 2015, when I started at Rivian with RJ, we were, 10 or 15 people.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't have any suppliers. We didn't have any investors. We didn't have any partners. We didn't have any manufacturing facility. 2021, which is 6 years later, we launched 3 vehicles in a span of 6 months on a very, very vertically integrated platform. Right. So Rivian was a perfect case in point of how companies like an electric car manufacturer can shorten the life cycle of developing these products by taking a vertically integrated approach, where you're not just cutting time, but cutting complexity of working with, a tiered supply base.
Right.
Fast forward to today, it's a very different environment. The advent of AI into the physical domain is further accelerated and shortened the development pathways, the level of investment that is needed to get to first products. There is also talent availability. It's a very important point, Mac, because when we were building Rivian, how many people in the industry had actually gone through a full development cycle of launching a hardware product in this domain, which is
Right.
reliable, which is safe, which passes the regulatory hurdle. Now there is, because of the success of Tesla, because of the success of Rivian and a few other companies, there's also an availability of talent. And that's
Yeah.
sort of being the tailwinds in today's sort of physical AI world.
Yeah. I mean, that's good to hear, just in that I wasn't sure, it's interesting, the vertically integrated aspect of it, right? Because I always say part of the challenge for somebody trying to raise money for a new EV startup is, if your best case scenario is you become Ford, well, Wall Street doesn't seem to like Ford either, right? Like, there's not
Yes.
making cars is an extremely capital intensive thing, and the margins are tough. It's ruthlessly competitive. But it's interesting to hear, that AI is speeding that pipeline. And that investors are still interested. But without the government support that was available at the dawn of Rivian and Tesla, I mean, how does that factor in? Do you think there's
Yeah.
risk?
Absolutely, there is always some short-term headwinds that I think the EV industry is facing, because some of those protective measures that were in place for a few years have gone away, and it has resulted in, as we call, an EV slowdown. But I don't look at that in a too serious way. I don't think I know that we did not build Rivian depending on incentives and credits. And I don't think the industry is going to succeed or fail because of an existing or not existing of the incentive structure. I think they are important in the short term, and it's something that I'm sure players in the EV space have to navigate. But I think the long-term trend is very clear. And I think, I probably bring together your first point with this. You talked about China and what the Chinese EV industry has done. And I think the best way, I've thought about it is, if you were to buy a car in 2030, just taking a point in time in the future, I think it is inconceivable to think that that car is not going to be a software-defined platform on wheels. And what that means is, it's just impossible to imagine that the consumer of today in the 2030 timeframe would buy a car that does not have the basic intelligence that they're used to in other domains of their lives.
Right.
Now, if you sort of take it back, how do you get to that end point is you have to start from that substrate, which is, hey, what are the basic components of building a car? You sort of have to have good engineering and good control over that. You need to have a network architecture that you control, which means you cannot be a slave to a tiered supply base that was historically, for the last 50 years, selling a small computer with every component that they sell. And as a result, there are hundreds of these ECUs or these control units inside a car. Take that one step forward. If you don't have that modern network architecture, there is no way to imagine next levels of autonomy on that vehicle, because that is where you take that to the next level, where you have the perception stack that you need to engineer and control. You need to have the compute that you engineer and control. You need to have the AI that is based on that flywheel that you control.
Yep.
So if you now look at 2030 and say, wait, the cars are going to be software defined and they're going to be autonomous, well, a lot of work has to be done in 10 years or 15 years prior to that 2030 timeframe. And what only the companies that have been able to start from that substrate level, which is, what's that EV substrate, and then build the network architecture on that, build the autonomy stack on that, I think are going to be successful. And what China did, because of design or coincidence, they didn't have any legacy substrates. So anybody that was designing that substrate designed it from ground up.
Right.
And that is why, it doesn't scare me that Chinese cars are low cost, to be honest. It's not their cost advantage that scares me, because there's a reason behind it. They are highly subsidized There's a different environment in terms of what the government, the role that they play, the cost of capital that they have. If they were to build that same car in the US, their cost base is going to be the same. What scares me is how technologically advanced they are relative to 90% of the cars that exist on the road today.
Right.
And I think that is more scary.
Yeah. And I mean, as we approach the start, again, part of that, right, is the fierce internal competition. And I do think that's something that people really underrate in the whole Chinese EV story, is just that, like, the advantage of not having an old way of doing things at all means that, you know, it's much harder to turn a legacy hardware company that is supplier based into a software company than it is to just start a software based company, right?
Absolutely.
But, you know, when you were building Rivian, part of the benefit was there was no Rivian. There was no Chinese EVs. There was no Lucid. It was GM, Ford, and then there was Tesla off doing its own thing. And so if I consider, you know, you have Tesla is like the class of 2013. It's the first graduating class in 100 years in the automotive industry, or whatever, 60 or whatever. And then you have 2021, 2022, Lucids and Rivians enter this scene. Maybe 27, we have Slate and, you know, Scout are supposed to come out. But at the same time, you know, companies like Ford are moving to a, you know, substrate level software-defined vehicle platform for their next, you know, affordable EV. And so my question to you is, with what you're seeing from investors and with what you're seeing in the industry, like, is there a class of 2020 or 2032? Is there a class of 2035 where there's still going to be new startups that are disrupting here? Or with China and Rivian and all of these existing companies, is there not going to be as much room to launch additional brands? Because I still think we need more brands in this country.
I love that question for two reasons. Because of the last statement that you just made. Absolutely, if you ask me, what is the single biggest factor to go from 10% EV penetration to 100% EV penetration? It's more choices. You know, we all need more choices. You know, Model 3 and Model X cannot be the answer forever when it comes to the billboard for electric cars. You know, you need the R2. You know, you need the Gravity from Lucid. You need 20 other models because that's how big the market is. So you need choice. And I do believe that the consumer is hungry for choice. Now, the demand is good. I'll talk about the supply side. Very interesting. I find it difficult to imagine a world where, if the buying criteria for a car in 2030, which we just went through, is a car that can drive itself, is software defined, is intuitive, is intelligent, I find it difficult to imagine that the incumbent car makers are going to successfully make that climb. And the reason I am bearish on that is what we just talked about, this transition from the legacy to this modern architecture, is extremely difficult. It's extremely complex. And from a very human psychology point of view, CEOs, management teams have to put their careers on the line to go through a mindset and a culture shift.
Right.
And as public companies, we know this, we have so much data on this. You know, the decision that they make today is going to show results in 5, 6, 7 years.
Yeah.
The average tenure of a CEO is shorter than that. And what we are seeing is U-turns galore.
Yeah.
We're going to invest billions of dollars in electrification. Oh no, the incentives are going away. We are going to go away from electrification towards hybrids and back to our, you know, F-150s and the gasoline. Wait a minute, that's not how Elon would think about it. That's not how RJ Scaringe would think about it. And that's because they are able to play that long game because that's existential for them. That's what they believe. They don't have a legacy. They don't have any shackles organizationally, culturally, and that's why they make it. So now I say that, and I say the demand is there. So who's going to meet the demand? Will there be more new companies? I think so. I think so. Will there be a lot of new companies? I don't think so. I think we are going to see volume get consolidated around a fewer set of companies. And I do see that few companies will not exist in this transition.
Yeah, are there any that you can identify? Like, is there like a hierarchy among the incumbents? Are there any that you think are best positioned to meet this moment and bring out like the kind of technology that they need to? Are there any that you think are like, I don't know if you're going to survive? Do you care to comment on that?
Well, the only comment I'll make is and I am a bit biased here, but I think what Volkswagen did with Rivian was very interesting. I think that was a very, I think history will remember that as a pretty smart move if both companies can pull it off, to recognize what we just talked about, that we cannot go into the next scale of Volkswagen being at scale without doing a tectonic shift in our architecture and our software capabilities.
Yeah.
They accepted that we can't do this from inside. They, I'll be surprised that they knocked on Tesla's door. And even if they did, I don't think they would have gotten a response there. But Rivian's business model allowed for that.
Right.
And I think makes me more bullish on that business model of, I would say, deep partnerships between companies coming from two different worlds, two different skill sets, and finding a way to make it work. The risk here is that these are very difficult organizational projects to pull off.
Yeah.
But I think strategically it's the right way to think about it from the point of view of a large incumbent who I have a lot of respect for. The brands that they have built have survived decades and decades, and there's a lot of brand equity in that. And I would love to see the next generation of cars from that brand be accepted. I don't think that's going to happen. I don't think this is a play that there is no liquid market for those kind of partnerships to happen, too many of them.
Yeah.
But the ones that are maybe are going to be able to do it would make it through.
I think it's really interesting because it also touches on, I was going to ask you, if you won't comment on specific car companies, if maybe you would comment on the different level of challenges for Japanese automakers versus Korean versus American versus European, because I think the Volkswagen example is a really stunning example of what I consider the biggest challenge for the European companies, where like if you talk to, if you look at GM or Ford's executive team right now, right, like they have Apple vets and they have, Tesla vets, and they're pulling from a very robust software and AI infrastructure that is built in the United States. And, Volkswagen doesn't have that, right? There isn't a German Apple in the same way. And it makes sense that, to me, they partnered with an American company on that. How do you feel about, the different power centers?
Yeah, great question again. And I think I'll answer this in a slightly different way. The way I would look at this is, which of the incumbent companies believe that autonomy is a near-term opportunity or risk, depending on how you look at it, or it is still a distance away. Now, if you believe that autonomy is a near-term opportunity, massive seismic change coming to the market, then you are going to start making decisions. You should have started making decisions about this maybe 5 years back, but at least right now, to be a legitimate player in that future world, you have to make some decisions, some very difficult decisions around the kind of investments you make internally and the kind of partnerships you form, the alliances that you do. Business as usual will not get them to that world. The ones that believe that, well, let's wait and watch. Let's experiment. Let's put in a small investment in this company and let's do a pilot with this player, or let's have this internal innovation team focus on this while we are working on the mothership. Those companies, in my view, that are sitting on the sidelines are the ones that are going to see a more dramatic decline in
Yeah.
their market share starting 29, 30, who knows, in that
Yeah.
time frame. So if I go through the different power centers, the Japanese, the Europeans and the US and the Americans, I'm not able to see a difference in either of their strategies.
Gotcha.
Maybe, I mean, honestly, Volkswagen, what they did with Rivian was the biggest move that you can say, wow, they made a big move, right? GM did that with Cruise at one point, but looks like that's gone in a different direction recently. Ford's made some big moves as well, especially on the electrification side, and that seemed to be, tempering a bit as well. So what I'm seeing is a very common thread of making 2 steps forward and maybe taking a step back.
Yeah.
Worst case, taking 1 step forward and taking 2 steps back. But that's probably why I am bearish, that I think the consequences are not as evident to them as as it feels to me, because I think we are on the precipice of a massive. If electrification was whatever that Richter scale earthquake, 5 point earthquake, this is going to be like a 7-point earthquake.
Right.
Like it just feels like this one is going to be even more transformative.
What do you think that you're seeing that they're not, right? Like what about the environment, about the technology, about the strides that have been made? Like what convinces you that we're on the precipice of autonomy being just much more relevant than it has been, right? We had in the 2010s a lot of hype around it, then kind of a big drop off. Now it's back like full force. I think for a lot of legitimate reasons. You have Waymo out here doing, hundreds of thousands of driverless trips, but like what to you signals that autonomous really is this next wave?
I think 2 factors. One is the transition from autonomy 1.0 to 2.0. The rules-based architecture, which had a lot of costs associated with the sensor topology, with the lack of generalizability, the intensity of rules and humans that are involved to write and rewrite and iterate on code, to this 2.0 architecture, which is this neural net based, continuously learning, faster way to generalize across geographies, across domains. And as a result of that, you see companies like Waymo, see companies like Wave, Tesla. And I think in many ways, Rivian, even though they are maybe slightly behind, but they have all the ingredients to scale that curve effectively. So the technology has shifted, and you have to sort of acknowledge it. And the best data point of that is, hey, you can actually sit in a driverless car today.
Right.
And man, that experience is so boring. It's so boring because
Nothing happens.
there's nothing happens. It just
Yeah.
drives equal or better than a human driver.
Yeah.
Right. Companies like Uber are definitely seeing this. And this is existential for them, and that's why you see them making some big moves. Trying to figure out how they are going to be. What is Uber 2.0 in a world of autonomy? Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. What do you think of their strategy, or who do you think when you look at there's a few different categories of players, right? There's the auto companies that are trying to kind of map autonomous capability onto what they do already. There's the pure play like Wave, like Waymo, Wave, which you're an investor in. And then there's Uber, which is kind of trying to be the rails of this and just make a huge amount of bets. Who do you think has the power here? Who do you think sort of leads AVs in the future?
I love this question because I spend a lot of time thinking through this. Wave is a portfolio company of ours, so it's sort of we're close to it in many ways. I see 2 different models. Model 1 is a full stack model. Tesla, Waymo. You control everything end to end. I think that model has massive advantages. Why? Because you basically control the data flywheel. You can train in this 2.0 architecture that has even bigger premium. You have the fleet, you have a customer base, you have a lot of operational capabilities, not Waymo, but Tesla, because of them serving the consumer market and having this infrastructure around it. And I think that is definitely one winning model. There are not many tenants in addition to Tesla and Waymo that can be part of that model. The only one that I can think of is Rivian, especially with what they showed at the Autonomy Day. They have the same ingredients that Tesla has, probably some time behind them on their development journey, but they control the fleet, they control the sensor stack, they have their own inference platform, they have the same infrastructure. So that's one model. The other model is what I call as like a multi-tenant marriage model. You need to marry an operator like Uber with a technology provider, a pure play technology provider like a Wave, and then have an OEM as the third leg of that stool, and they need to come together. More complex, but I think it has a way to create a much bigger marketplace, just because you can have, you're not limited. That is a more liquid, there are more OEMs that would love to participate on the autonomy theme without being able, even if they're not able to develop their own autonomy stack, but they at least can be a tenant and capture that per mile economics in a way. The challenge there is, now you are sharing economics with three people.
Right.
And there are, that business model has never been done before at scale, obviously. So I think definitely have my eyes on Uber and the likes of Wave and how they are going about creating these alliances, creating a win-win-win scenario. But those are only two models that are going to exist. And I think both will exist in parallel. I don't think it's one versus the other. I don't think there'll be a lot of alliances that will work out, but there will be a few that will be able to compete very effectively against the full stack models.
Now, when we're talking about this future where things are autonomous, all software based, that is sort of a continuation of what we've already seen start, the slippery slope we're already on, right? Like there are autonomous taxis testing in my neighborhood right now. By the end of this year, I will be able to take them. In theory, consumer focused autonomy is coming, depending on who you ask, somewhere between last year and, a year and a half from now or whatever. But how does the micromobility thing play into this? Because this is a space where, again, you're investor in also, but this is a place where I think I've seen a lot of companies talking for a long time about how important this is and how many opportunities there are. But right now it's like, it seems like everyone is competing to figure out who's going to sell my DoorDasher his e-bike, right? And like, obviously that's not like the long-term blue sky where this all goes. But what is the pathway there, and why is this such a hot spot of investment right now?
Yeah, I'm really excited about it, because, if you sort of see the trajectory of automotive over the last 15 years, let's say since Tesla, in that sort of, we went 0.1% penetration to whatever, 10% penetration in 10, 15 years. But if you look at where the world was pre-Tesla, that's where micromobility is today. It is a massive market, especially if you go outside the US and go to Europe and go to Asia, Africa, South America. It is a bigger market than automotive, obviously. The economy runs on micromobility over there, unlike the US. Quick commerce, e-commerce, ride hailing, those are the primary vehicles by a long way relative to cars. In other words, to move people and to move goods, actually at a global scale, micromobility plays a bigger part than automotive. Now, that's a big market. How come can you name one player that you can say is the Tesla of micromobility? Because no one has made that attempt, because that market has not been served or disrupted, which which is what we saw at Rivian when we were thinking about adjacencies. And we're like, wait a minute, a big market that is going to go through the same technology innovation curve, it is going to only grow. The growth rates of that segment is actually more than automotive. That segment is growing at double the rate of automotive. And how come there is no single scaled modern player in that category? That's the opportunity we saw. And like, that's because a lot of attempts there were some attempts made, you're right, but they were like one form factor, one category, one segment, one geography. And then you don't build scale and you get into that vicious cycle of hardware where you don't have scale, you can't control the cost, you're not able to get the demand, you don't get the demand, and it sort of, goes into that motion. So we thought, what would be a platform approach to this? Why should we design a product one at a time? Let's design a platform. And just that statement itself had never been done before. None of those previous attempts tried to design their own tech stack. They were trying to basically get off the shelf technologies, do some of their own design, but they were sort of slaves to the tiered supply base. So they were trying to build another, it's like if Tesla tried to build another Ford.
Right.
That's what happened in that 1.0 version of micromobility. That's what we shifted with also. And as a result of that, now on that same platform, you saw the e-bike. There's also the Amazon Quad. That's the same platform. Stuff that moves a single human to a quad vehicle that can move packages and get into tight areas. And the unit economics on a quad, micromobility quad, is significantly better than what you get in an electric delivery van, right? Now you can start thinking about, you extend that platform. You talked about food delivery. It's very interesting because if things are going to become more automated when it comes to food and other quick commerce items, it's not the cars that are going to. Do you need a car to deliver a food packet? You don't. It's going to be a micromobility segment. And we're going to start seeing the intersection of electrification and autonomy in micromobility now. And I think also is leading that.
Right, because if you don't need the car, you sure as hell don't need the driver, right? To move something that weighs less than a pound. Yeah.
And if you can remove the driver, then you can really innovate on the form factor and optimize it for what the use case is. If you're delivering a big box versus a small light package versus a medium-sized heavy box, you can now optimize the unit economics even better because you can make it autonomous. And that's the opportunity that we saw, and that's the vision we have with also.
Great.
So much cool stuff happening in mobility. Really great talking to somebody who's on the leading edge of a lot of it. Jiten Behl, partner at Eclipse. Thanks so much for joining us today. Really appreciate your time.
Yeah, thanks. That was awesome.
Thanks for having me. Really enjoyed it.
Now it's time for Plus Minus, our segment where we talk about who's up and who's down in the EV space. Mac, who you got this week?
All right, we said we're going to be more positive this week, so I got an up, or a plus, I should say, and it's Tesla and Volvo for leading the charge on supply chain sustainability, which is sort of unsexy topic, but we talk a lot about.
I literally just fell asleep. Go ahead.
It's an unsexy topic, but also when you bring up EVs to haters, they're always like, but the supply chain. It's not a problem. But anyway, the environmental group Lead the Charge put out a new report, and they found that Volvo EVs had the cleanest supply chain from a fossil fuel and sustainability perspective, while if you factored in like human rights and responsible sourcing, as you probably should, Tesla is on top. So everyone, though, seems to be improving here, and like this is a place where the more renewable energy is out there, the more we push towards EVs, it's much easier to build a renewable supply chain. But yeah, great to see that there's actual improvement happening despite, everything else going on.
Yeah, that's awesome. I also have a plus this week. I forgot that we were supposed to be positive. This is just my nature this week.
You're just that kind of guy.
I'm just that kind of guy. My plus is the Volkswagen brand. You kind of wouldn't know it from the American perspective. Volkswagen has just never really been a significant part of America's auto industry, and its EV stuff has been moderately successful, but not that much. So I was kind of surprised to see that Volkswagen announced that it has now delivered 2 million EVs globally. That includes over 900,000 of the ID4 and ID5, 628,000 ID3s, which we don't get here in the US, and well over 100,000 ID7s. So like across the pond, Volkswagen is actually doing pretty darn well. They are now the top seller of EVs in Europe, beating Tesla for the first time. And again, this is just the Volkswagen brand. This isn't the group. This doesn't include Porsche, Audi, all those. So, you know, we've seen our fair share of like faceplants and stumbles in the EV world.
Yeah.
There's a lot of companies that are struggling to really figure this out. I think in some ways Volkswagen is one of them.
Yeah.
But in other ways, there's real progress happening here, and 2 million electric Volkswagens delivered, most of those just in the last like couple of years. That's pretty good stuff.
Yeah. I mean, I sometimes call Volkswagen the General Motors of Europe, which pisses both groups off completely. But there is this thing of like, you know, there's a home court advantage, right? We buy more American cars that fail to compete in Europe. And then, you know, you try to bring mainstream Volkswagens here and they fail to compete. And in both cases, the luxury arms sometimes do better, part because it's just like, it's cheaper to make cars locally and your local consumers are a little more sympathetic to you. And I think Volkswagen has done a good job of being like, hey, you know, like ID4 is made in America. They pushed hard on that, but it wasn't the perfect product for us. And, you know, GM and Ford were pushing their thing. But, you know, in Europe, they've just been steadily making progress. And I gave them credit a couple months back of just they're recognizing a lot of the things that we don't like about those ID cars, right? Like the bad software, the lack of physical controls, and like they're addressing it. And I think it just goes back to what we've talked about a lot. Like automotive product cycles are long, and most of these companies are really, they didn't deliver their long range, like mainstream EVs to like 2021, which means we're just getting to the end of like the first real product cycle where they had multiple options that were not just like compliance cars like the e-Golf. And yeah, I think it's just, I mean, it's 2 million now. It's going to be more than, you know, however long it took to get here, it's going to take a lot less long to get to 4 million, right? So yeah, that's great news.
Yeah, good stuff. Thanks for listening to the Plugged In podcast from InsideEVs. We'll be back next Friday. Today's show was produced by Michael Perkins and is brought to you by the Motorsport Network. Make sure to follow us wherever you get your podcasts, subscribe to the InsideEVs YouTube channel. It really helps us out. And check out all our latest coverage on InsideEVs.com. See you next week.
See ya.